Unaware his wife is the secret trillionaire heiress who owns his company. Husband pushed her and their child out of their home until he saw her name on the one paper he couldn't ignore. He didn't slap her, he didn't scream, he did something colder. In the narrow hallway of the house he called his, Daniel Hale placed one hand on his wife's shoulder and pushed her forward toward the door, not violently, but deliberately. Enough to tell her this wasn't a discussion, enough to tell her she no longer belonged. "Take the kid," he said, already glancing at his phone. "You can stay somewhere else for a while." Legally, the house was marital property. On the title, though, only his name appeared, a detail he now clung to as proof that everything inside it was his. Evelyn stumbled one step, instinctively pulling their 6-year-old son close as his backpack slipped off his shoulder and hit the floor. The boy looked up, confused, clutching his mother's coat. "This is our home," Evelyn said, her voice barely steady. Daniel opened the door and pushed again, firmer this time, guiding them out like an inconvenience, not a family. "No," he said flatly. "This is my house. I paid for it." The door closed behind them. No yelling, no witnesses. Just a mother standing in the night with her child in a sleek car parked across the street where another woman sat watching, waiting. Daniel believed that push erased her. He believed the quiet woman he married had nothing left once she stepped outside that door. He believed the company he ran belonged to him alone. What he never knew was this. On documents he never bothered to read, sealed inside trusts and legal structures older than his ambition, the woman he pushed out was the majority beneficial owner of everything he thought he built. Through layered entities and silent board votes, her family trust had quietly taken control of the company that bore his vision and her money. And while Daniel went back inside, confident and smiling, a different kind of movement had already begun: internal audits, digital trails, and one court paper prepared in silence. Weeks later, Daniel would sit in a courtroom, flipping casually through documents until his hands froze. Because the name he saw on that page was the same name he had just pushed out of his life. And that was the moment his world collapsed. Dear viewers, before we begin, your support means everything. If you're watching without subscribing, it's like letting Evelyn's voice fade into silence. Subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from. Let's get into the story. The first thing that broke the silence was a soft click. Evelyn Hale froze for half a second, her fingers hovering above a puzzle piece shaped like a small blue whale. Her 6-year-old son, Noah Hale, sat cross-legged across from her on the living room floor, his brows pulled together in deep concentration. He was small for his age, with dark hair that never stayed combed, and eyes that noticed far more than adults like to believe. The click came again, a phone notification. Evelyn didn't look up right away, but she felt it. The shift in the room, the change in air. Her husband, Daniel Hale, 37, founder and CEO of a fast-growing tech company, walked past them toward the kitchen. He didn't glance down, didn't smile at his son, didn't slow his step. His phone buzzed again. Daniel looked at the screen and smiled. Not the tired smile he gave Evelyn at night, not the polite one he used for neighbors. This smile was private, light, alive. Evelyn noticed it. She said nothing. The house around them was quiet, modest, and carefully chosen. 2 bedrooms, neutral walls, second-hand furniture polished until it looked new. No framed awards. No expensive art. Nothing that suggested the woman kneeling on the floor could, if she wished, buy the entire street and the 3 blocks behind it. What no one saw in this small rental neighborhood was that the value she could pull with a single phone call sat beyond what most people could even name. Her late father's network of companies had once managed sums measured in the hundreds of billions. By the time everything was consolidated into a single structure, the assets under that umbrella were whispered about in private circles as trillion-level money. Not her personal cash, but a global financial machine she could quietly direct. "Mom," Noah whispered, fitting the whale into place. "It goes here, right?" Evelyn smiled softly. "Yes, right there." Her voice was calm. It always was. That calm had been learned a long time ago. Evelyn had been 23 when she first understood what silence could protect. She stood in a private office made of glass and quiet power. Men twice her age rose from their seats as she entered, not out of courtesy but obligation. Lawyers, board members, family trustees, all of them waiting. Her father had died 3 weeks earlier. Not poor, not quietly. He had been one of those men whose name most people never heard, but whose decisions quietly shifted markets. The architect behind a web of funds and holding companies that controlled pieces of banks, energy firms, tech giants, never loudly branded, always hidden one layer back. His voice still lived in her memory, steady and firm. If people love your money, they will never love you. He had said it the night before she left for college, placing a thin folder on the table between them. If you ever marry, test the heart, not the hunger. That folder became her life. Inside was the blueprint for a world most people never saw. Hale Holdings, Master Trust. She inherited a fortune measured in numbers most people never say out loud. The wealth wasn't stored in cash or homes. It lived in layered trusts, holding companies, and board-controlled entities designed to protect her from attention and predators. Her name was hidden behind legal walls so thick they required court orders and multiple jurisdictions to penetrate. On public paperwork, all anyone ever saw were institutional names and faceless entities. No Evelyn, no hint that a single person stood at the center. She didn't just inherit money, she inherited control without visibility. A board liaison handled formal votes. Professional trustees signed documents. They all knew who the principal beneficiary was, but no one outside that circle did, and she chose to keep it that way. Daniel Hale entered her life 2 years later, long before the suits, the office, and the applause. He was working out of a shared office space, sleeping 4 hours a night, drinking cheap energy drinks, and talking endlessly about building something honest. Not fast. Not flashy, honest. That word mattered to Evelyn. He talked more about the product than the potential exit, more about the people he wanted to hire than the lifestyle he wanted to buy. When he asked what she did, and she said, consulting strategy for family businesses, he just nodded and moved on. He didn't ask which families. He didn't ask what size. He didn't try to impress her with numbers. When his startup, Nexus Point Technologies, needed capital to survive, Evelyn made a single call from a quiet corner. Her legal team created a venture shell, a standard investment vehicle used by the family office. On paper, it had a forgettable name and a registered address in a city Daniel had never visited. The money moved quietly, cleanly. Hale Holdings sat 2 layers above it, invisible. Daniel saw only a committed institutional investor. He never asked who ultimately owned it. Evelyn took that as a sign. He wasn't chasing her for money. Once, months later, when Nexus Point landed its first major contract, Daniel laughed and said, "Whoever that fund is, they must own half the world." Evelyn smiled. He didn't realize that her family structures held a controlling stake in his company, and that as he raised more capital, her trust kept quietly matching and consolidating until her side was the single largest shareholder. She didn't correct him. The puzzle was nearly finished now. Daniel opened the fridge, poured himself a drink, and leaned against the counter. His phone buzzed again. He typed quickly, his back still turned. Evelyn watched him not with suspicion, but with attention. Love, she believed, meant noticing before accusing. She placed the final piece into the puzzle. Noah clapped quietly. "We did it." "Yes," she said, "we did." That night, after Noah was asleep and Daniel was still on his phone, Evelyn walked into the bedroom alone. She knelt beside the closet and slid open a drawer that stayed locked. Inside was a slim folder. No logos, no colors, just black text. Hale Holdings, Master Trust. After the wedding, the trust's lawyers had quietly updated some of the internal paperwork to reflect her married name. The outside world still saw only corporate entities. Daniel had never seen the master document. He'd never needed to. At least, not yet. Evelyn rested her hand on it. She didn't open it. "I promised myself," she whispered into the quiet room, "I'd never need this." Behind her, down the hall, a phone buzzed again. And this time, Daniel laughed softly. Evelyn closed the drawer. The silence stayed, but it felt different now, like it was waiting for something to break. The sound of applause filled the room, and Daniel Hale stood in the center of it. He straightened his jacket as employees clapped, investors smiled, and cameras flashed. Nexus Point's logo gleamed on the far wall, sleek, modern, expensive. At 37, Daniel looked every bit the successful founder now. The company had outgrown its early struggles. The office was larger, the staff was bigger, the praise was louder, and Daniel drank it in. From the edge of the room stood Lila Monroe, 29, his newly promoted executive assistant. She wasn't clapping the loudest, but she was watching the closest. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always dressed one step more polished than required, Lila had a talent for knowing where power sat before it spoke. When Daniel stepped down from the small stage, she was already there. "That was impressive," she said lightly, handing him a tablet before he even asked. "The board loved you." Daniel smiled. "Of course they did." Lila laughed, not too loud, just enough. As they walked, she leaned in slightly, her fingers brushing his arm as if by accident. Daniel didn't pull away. He barely noticed the touch, but his body remembered it. Across the glass wall of the conference room, no one questioned the closeness. Founders were allowed personal gravity. The more successful he became, the more forgiveness people offered his behavior. At the office, everyone knew Nexus Point had a major institutional backer. They didn't know that the quiet board representative, who rarely appeared in person, answered directly to Evelyn's family trust. Daniel treated that investor as a faceless force, useful but distant. At home, the change showed differently. Evelyn noticed it first in the quiet spaces. Daniel stopped asking how her day went, stopped sitting on the floor with Noah, stopped sharing his calendar the way he used to when everything was chaotic and small. They had once used a shared family email and calendar to juggle early meetings and babysitting. Now, most invites went only to his work account, an account Lila managed. When Evelyn asked about a late meeting, Daniel waved it off. Just work stuff. When she mentioned a dinner she thought they'd planned, he frowned. "I never confirmed that." The shared calendar stopped updating. Invitations no longer came. Messages disappeared before she could read them. Not erased, redirected. At the office, Lila had taken over Daniel's private schedule. She filtered calls. She answered emails before Daniel ever saw them. She decided what reached him and what didn't. She told herself it was efficiency. She told herself it was her job. But when Daniel joked, "I don't know what I'd do without you," Lila smiled longer than necessary. One evening, Evelyn sat on the couch folding laundry while Noah colored beside her. The TV played softly, but no one was watching. Daniel sat across the room, his phone glowing in his hand. It buzzed. Daniel smiled. Noah looked up from his crayons. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart?" Noah hesitated, then lowered his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Why does Dad smile at his phone like that?" Evelyn's hands stopped mid-fold. The question was innocent. The timing was not. She looked at Daniel. He hadn't heard, or pretended not to. Evelyn forced a gentle smile. "Sometimes people get happy messages." Noah nodded slowly. "He doesn't smile like that at us." The words landed softly but deep. Evelyn pulled Noah close. "Finish your drawing." She didn't look at Daniel again. That night, the house felt too quiet. Evelyn waited up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold. Midnight passed. Then later, when Daniel finally came home, his jacket smelled unfamiliar, not of perfume, but of too many hours somewhere else. "You're up," he said, distracted, scrolling through his phone. "I was waiting," Evelyn replied calmly. "For what? For you." Daniel sighed, not angrily but impatiently. Like the question cost him something. Evelyn studied his face. The man she married was still there but slightly out of focus, like a photo that had been handled too many times. She chose her words carefully. "Are you happy?" Daniel didn't look up. "You worry too much," he said. "Everything's fine." He walked past her toward the bedroom, already typing. Evelyn stayed where she was. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was crowded with things unsaid. Across town, Lila Monroe sat alone in her apartment, laptop open, phone in hand. She reread the message she was about to send. Not romantic, not obvious, just dangerous enough. Her thumb hovered. Then she typed, "She still doesn't know, right?" She watched the message send. 3 dots appeared. Then Daniel's reply came quickly. "Of course not." Lila leaned back, satisfaction flickering across her face. She didn't hate Evelyn. She barely thought about her. To Lila, this wasn't betrayal. It was opportunity. Back at home, Daniel's phone buzzed again. He smiled. Evelyn saw it this time. She didn't ask who it was from. She didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She simply watched as the space between them widened by inches that felt like miles. Later, when Daniel finally slept, Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought of her father's words, "Test the heart, not the hunger." She had tested, and something had cracked. In the dark, her eyes shifted toward the closet. Toward the drawer she hadn't opened. Not yet, but soon. Because outside the bedroom door, the quiet wasn't just waiting anymore. It was preparing. The argument began before Daniel even stepped fully inside the house. The front door slammed harder than usual, rattling the framed family photo on the wall. Evelyn felt the vibration from the living room floor, where she sat helping Noah with homework. Noah flinched. Daniel Hale stood near the door, his tie loosened, jaw tight, eyes sharp with something that looked like anger but felt more like decision. "We need to talk," he said. "Not can we, not please." Evelyn rose slowly. "You're home late," Daniel scoffed. "Because someone around here actually works." The words hit harder than shouting would have. Noah looked up, confused. Evelyn placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Go to your room, sweetheart, just for a minute." Noah hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "You didn't." Daniel didn't correct her. When Noah disappeared down the hall, Daniel stepped forward, arms crossed, pacing like a man preparing a speech he'd rehearsed in his head on the drive over. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "I'm carrying everything. The company, the bills, the pressure." Evelyn listened, her face calm, though something inside her tightened. "I support you," she said. "I always have." Daniel laughed, short and bitter. "Support? You sit at home, you don't contribute, you don't understand what it takes to build something." Evelyn felt the sting, but she didn't interrupt. "You don't even try to keep up anymore," Daniel continued. "You live in this quiet little world. Meanwhile, I'm surrounded by people who actually add value." He didn't say Lila's name. He didn't have to. Evelyn's voice was steady. "If this is about work stress, it's about you," he snapped. "You're holding me back." The room went silent. Daniel took a breath, as if calming himself, then spoke again, colder now. "I need space." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Then take it. We can talk about no," he interrupted. "You and the kid can stay somewhere else for a while." The words landed like something heavy dropped on glass. Evelyn stared at him. "Daniel, this is our home." Daniel didn't hesitate. "No," he said flatly. "This is my house. I paid for it. My name is on every document." He didn't mention that legally. Marriage didn't work the way he wanted to believe. In his mind, the person paying the mortgage owned the walls. That was the moment something in Evelyn broke, not loudly, not visibly, but completely. She remembered signing the papers years ago, letting the house be in his name alone, because she didn't want any trail that might tie their personal life back to Hale Holdings. Believing marriage meant shared ground, not weapons. She had trusted him. She had never imagined he would use paperwork as a knife. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked away. "That's not my problem right now." "Not our problem, your problem." Evelyn nodded once. "Okay," she said. That surprised him. The packing was silent. No yelling, no thrown objects, no dramatic last words. Evelyn moved with calm precision, placing clothes into a single suitcase. Noah watched from the doorway, clutching his favorite backpack too big for his small shoulders. "Are we going on a trip?" Noah asked softly. "Yes," Evelyn said, kneeling in front of him. "A short one. Will Dad come?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Not right now." Noah nodded, trying to be brave. Daniel stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching like a stranger observing a process he'd ordered but didn't want to witness. When Evelyn zipped the suitcase, Daniel checked his phone. A message lit up the screen. He smiled. Evelyn saw it. She said nothing. At the door, she paused. "Daniel," she said, not pleading, not angry. "If you're doing this because you think I'm weak," he cut her off. "I'm doing this because I'm done." She studied his face. The man she married had been replaced by someone who believed power came from being admired by the right people, even if it meant stepping on the wrong ones. "Then I hope it was worth it," she said. Daniel opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Outside, the night was quiet. No neighbors watching, no drama to witness. Evelyn stepped onto the porch with Noah beside her. Daniel stayed inside. The door closed behind them. The sound echoed longer than it should have. As Evelyn walked down the steps, she noticed a car parked across the street. Sleek. New. The engine was off, but the interior light glowed faintly. Someone was inside. Evelyn didn't stop walking, but she knew. Lila Monroe sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed on the house. Watching. Not surprised. Not guilty. Expectant. Noah tugged Evelyn's hand. "Mom, who's that?" Evelyn looked straight ahead. "No one we need to worry about." But she memorized the car, the shape, the color, the certainty in her chest. As they reached the end of the driveway, Evelyn glanced back once. The house lights were already dimming. She understood then. This wasn't just abandonment, it was replacement. Evelyn adjusted the suitcase in her hand and kept walking. Behind her, across the street, the car door opened. And somewhere far deeper than anger, something quiet inside Evelyn began to wake up. Something patient, something prepared, and it knew exactly where to begin. The first thing Evelyn felt in the new place was the door locking behind her. The sound was sharp, final. It echoed through the narrow hallway of the furnished rental and settled deep in her chest. She stood still for a moment, Noah's small hand wrapped tightly in hers, her suitcase resting against her leg like it was catching its breath too. This place was quiet. Too quiet, no laughter from the next room, no footsteps overhead, no voice reminding her of what she had just lost. But it was safe. The apartment was small, clean, and temporarily arranged with a single call to the family office. A corporate lease had been signed electronically in her married name before she even reached the neighborhood. The keys waited in a lockbox. No front desk. No questions. Evelyn exhaled for the first time since the door had closed behind them at the house. Noah looked around, taking it all in with the seriousness only children carry in moments like this. "Is this our new home?" he asked. "For now," Evelyn said gently. She set the suitcase down and knelt in front of him. Noah's backpack slipped off one shoulder, nearly pulling him sideways. He frowned. "Did we do something wrong?" The question pierced her deeper than Daniel's words ever could. Evelyn placed both hands on Noah's arms and met his eyes. "No, we didn't do anything wrong." He waited. "We just learned something important," she said. "And sometimes learning means moving." Noah nodded slowly, not fully understanding but trusting her anyway. That trust steadied her. That night, after Noah finally fell asleep on the unfamiliar bed, Evelyn sat alone at the small kitchen table. The apartment hummed softly, every sound amplified by newness. The stillness pressed in, but it no longer felt empty. It felt focused. Evelyn reached for her phone. Her hands were steady. She made the first call. The man on the other end answered on the first ring. He had known her since she was a teenager, back when her last name opened doors quietly instead of loudly. "I need legal counsel," Evelyn said. Immediately. There was no surprise in his voice. "Understood. Family or personal?" "Both," she said, "but start with personal." He didn't say Daniel's name. He didn't need to. The second call came next. A private financial investigator. Discreet, relentless, expensive. Evelyn had vetted him years ago for trust-related audits and never thought she would need his services for herself. "I want a full review," she said. "Emails, transactions, internal approvals, everything tied to my husband and his assistant." A pause. "Corporate systems are protected," he said carefully. "I can't just break into them." "You won't," Evelyn replied. "You'll go through the board." She gave him a reference code only a handful of people in the world recognized, an internal control clause tied to Hale Holdings' position as Nexus Point's majority investor. "With that," she continued, "you'll request an internal compliance audit on behalf of the primary stakeholder, forensic review, full cooperation from their IT and finance teams. No one needs my name to do it." Understanding flickered in his silence. "Anyone specific?" he asked at last. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Lila Monroe, executive assistant, and my husband." The investigator exhaled slowly. "That will take some time, and it won't stay quiet inside the company." "That's fine," Evelyn replied. "Just don't miss anything." The third call was the hardest, not because of fear, but because it meant crossing a line she had promised herself she wouldn't. She dialed a secure number. A familiar voice answered. Older, calm, grounded in decades of discipline. The board liaison from her father's trust. "I never wanted to make this call," Evelyn said. "You wouldn't be calling if it wasn't necessary," the man replied. "What do you need?" Evelyn closed her eyes. I need you to prepare the ownership documents, she said. Not for public release. Not yet. I just need them ready and verified for court. Silence. Then, carefully, has something happened? Yes, Evelyn said, but I intend to handle it properly. The liaison didn't ask for details. He only said, I'll be ready. The following days passed quietly, too quietly for someone who had just been pushed out of her home. Evelyn cooked simple meals. She walked Noah to a nearby park. She smiled when he smiled. She answered his questions without letting her anger leak into her voice. She waited. Then the investigator called back. His voice was measured but tight. The board-approved audit opened the door, he said. We pulled emails from the company servers. Finance exported the ledgers. There are irregular transfers. Evelyn listened, her expression unreadable. How bad? She asked. Small at first, he said, then larger. Always approved under your husband's credentials. And the funds lead to accounts connected to Lila Monroe, he continued. There are also expense reports coded as business that clearly aren't. Hotels, gifts, travel that doesn't match any client record. Evelyn closed her eyes. So it's worse than I thought, she said. Yes, the investigator replied, but it's traceable and lawfully documented. The board has copies. Your attorney will too. When the call ended, Evelyn remained still, the weight of confirmation settling over her. This wasn't just betrayal, it was exposure. That night, Evelyn sat beside Noah as he slept, watching his chest rise and fall. Her phone vibrated, a message from Daniel. File the divorce. I already moved on. The words were blunt, efficient, final. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she turned it face down. No, she whispered, so softly only the walls could hear. You already did. She reached for the bedside drawer and rested her hand on it. Inside, the slim folder waited. Not opened, not yet. Outside, the world kept moving, unaware that something silent had begun to turn. And somewhere in law offices and trustee boards, paperwork was being prepared that would change everything. Evelyn lay down beside her son, eyes open, mind sharp. The storm hadn't arrived, but the ground beneath it was already shifting. The first file hit the table like a gunshot. Evelyn didn't flinch, but everyone else in the room did. The private financial investigator stood across from her, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but sharp. The small conference room was plain, chosen on purpose. No windows. No distractions. Just truth, laid out piece by piece. This is everything the internal audit pulled so far, he said, approved by the board's representative. And it's not good. He opened the folder. Emails appeared first, deleted ones, recovered ones. Messages Daniel believed were gone forever, still sitting on company backup servers that now, by board order, belonged to this investigation. Evelyn scanned them silently. Her face didn't change, but something deep inside her hardened. There were conversations between Daniel and Lila that had nothing to do with work schedules. Complaints about Evelyn, jokes at her expense, decisions made behind her back. The investigator slid another document forward. Expense reports, he said, approved by Daniel. Some falsified, some disguised. Evelyn's eyes moved line by line. Hotel charges listed as client meetings. Luxury purchases labeled office equipment. Travel reimbursements that matched no business calendar. And then this one matters, the investigator added. A promotion notice. Lila Monroe promoted to a strategic operations role. No formal job description. No board approval. No standard compensation review. Just Daniel's digital signature and a salary adjustment that outpaced similar roles by a wide margin. Evelyn looked up. That position doesn't exist in the original structure. It didn't, the investigator replied, until Daniel created it with a backdated memo. There's also a bonus pool he diverted discretionary funds into. Most of it went to her. The noose tightened. Across town, Lila Monroe stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her jacket. She smiled at her reflection. Everything still looked like it was going according to plan. Daniel had moved Evelyn out. The house was quiet now. His attention belonged to Lila more openly, more recklessly. She could feel the shift, the confidence. You don't have to hide anymore, she told him later that night, running her fingers lightly along his arm. Once the divorce is final, we can be public. Daniel nodded, distracted, already imagining his future. But Lila wasn't reckless. Behind her smile, she was careful. When Daniel left the room, she opened her laptop. She saved emails, downloaded attachments, copied expense approvals with his name on them. Messages where he instructed her to reroute funds or put it under client development. No one checks those lines. She didn't do it out of guilt. She did it because she understood power. And she knew when a man burned bridges too fast, someone always fell with him. She had no intention of being the one underneath. Back in the quiet conference room, the investigator reached the final section. Company funds, he said, used for personal property, nothing subtle. He paused. All tied to Daniel's sign-offs. The audit logs show he overrode finance flags more than once. Evelyn leaned back slowly. So if this goes public, she said, he doesn't just lose his reputation. No, the investigator replied. He loses credibility with regulators, the board, and the court. There's enough here for a formal complaint. Evelyn nodded once. Good. That afternoon, she made another call. Her attorney arrived an hour later. He was older, composed, and spoke only when necessary. He laid out documents with careful precision. Divorce petition, he said, citing abandonment and financial misconduct. The timing of him pushing you out with your child, combined with these records, strengthens your position. Evelyn read it without hesitation. Custody request, he continued, primary. Based on stability, his admitted abandonment in messages, and the pattern of misuse of corporate funds, she signed. Then he reached for a separate folder, thinner. He hesitated before opening it. This, he said carefully, changes the nature of everything. Inside were documents Evelyn had not touched in years. Ownership structures, trust disclosures, board authority summaries, all connected to one entity, Hale Holdings, Master Trust. The attorney studied her face. If this goes to court, he said quietly, your husband won't just lose his marriage. Evelyn finished the sentence without raising her voice. He'll lose his company. The attorney nodded. Completely. The board liaison has confirmed. Your trust holds a controlling stake, with authority to initiate leadership changes if necessary. Once we attach this to the divorce proceedings, it becomes part of the record. Silence filled the room. Not fear, not regret, resolution. Later that evening, Evelyn sat alone at the Reynolds' small dining table. Noah was asleep in the other room, clutching a stuffed animal he'd carried since he was 3. She stared at the stack of papers in front of her. So many years of restraint, so much silence. She hadn't hidden her identity out of shame, she had hidden it out of belief. Belief that love didn't need leverage, that marriage didn't require proof. She exhaled slowly. That belief was gone. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Just one line. I don't know what he told you, but I'm not the villain here. It didn't say who it was. It didn't have to. The timing, the wording, the avoidance of her name, Lila. Evelyn didn't respond. She didn't need to. Everyone reveals themselves eventually. The next morning, she sat across from her attorney again. He slid one final document across the table. It was heavier than the rest. Not in weight, but in consequence. At the top, stamped and sealed, majority shareholder disclosure court-sealed Evelyn's name was printed clearly. Fully spelled, legally undeniable. Not as wife, not as dependent. As the beneficial owner behind Hale Holdings' controlling stake in Nexus Point, the attorney watched her closely. Once this is lodged with the court, he said quietly, and unsealed for the judge, there's no going back. Daniel will see exactly who has held the power this entire time. Evelyn placed her hand on the paper. Her voice was calm. There was no going back the moment he pushed my child out of his home. She stood. The document remained on the table, waiting. And somewhere across town, Daniel Hale was still smiling at his phone, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to disappear. The envelope hit Daniel Hale's desk in front of everyone. Not slid, not handed gently, placed firm and unmistakable. The conference room went quiet. Senior managers sat frozen mid-discussion, laptops open, pens hovering. Daniel looked up, irritated, ready to dismiss whoever had interrupted him. A court officer stood there instead. Daniel Hale, the man said evenly, you've been served. The room seemed to shrink. Daniel scoffed and leaned back in his chair. You're doing this here? The officer didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out. Daniel picked up the envelope slowly, eyes scanning the bold heading. Petition for dissolution of marriage. A few people exchanged glances. Someone cleared their throat. Daniel laughed. Loud, dismissive. Well, he said, waving the papers, guess that's settled. He didn't read further. He tossed the envelope onto the table like it was nothing more than a bad joke and forced the meeting forward. Slides resumed. Numbers flickered on the screen. His voice sounded almost normal, but the room never fully recovered. Later, alone in his office with the door closed, Daniel finally opened the envelope properly. He skimmed the first pages. The language was sharp, precise, legal. Petition for dissolution. Primary custody requested. Financial disclosure demanded. Temporary restraining order on asset transfers. Daniel's mouth twisted. She doesn't have the money to fight this, he muttered to himself. She's bluffing with some cheap lawyer. He flipped near the back and stopped. There was an attachment. Not long, not dramatic. Just a clause his eyes snagged on. Financial interests subject to review under Hale Holdings, Master Trust. Daniel frowned. What the hell is that? He said out loud. He knew the name. Hale Holdings was the institutional investor that had backed Nexus Point's early rounds, the one he always called our silent whale. He'd seen it in cap tables and board minutes, but never thought about who sat behind it. Probably some technicality, he muttered. Something for my corporate lawyer to explain away. He didn't sign anything. He didn't respond. He put the packet aside and went back to checking projections. Across town, Evelyn sat in her attorney's office, hands folded in her lap. She hadn't been present when the papers were served. She didn't need to be. This will provoke him, the attorney said calmly. He'll focus on the divorce language and underestimate the financial references. That's fine, Evelyn replied. He always has. She thought of Noah, adjusting to a new routine without complaint. Stability mattered now. Control mattered more. On the desk between them lay 2 stacks of documents. The divorce petition, already filed. The sealed majority shareholder disclosure, prepared but not yet presented in court. When the court schedules the financial hearing, the attorney continued, tapping the sealed packet, we'll ask the judge to open this under confidentiality first. He'll see it then. Evelyn nodded once. Good, she said. Let the law go in order. That evening, Daniel stormed into his lawyer's office without an appointment. Tell me this is nothing, he said, slamming the papers down. Mark Ellison, a seasoned corporate attorney who had represented Daniel since the early days, adjusted his glasses and read carefully. He scanned the divorce allegations, then lingered on the financials. He didn't speak for a long moment. Daniel frowned. You're being dramatic. Mark finally looked up. This is not nothing. It's a domestic case, Daniel snapped. We'll settle. Just make it cheap. Mark tapped the page with the Hale Holdings clause. This part is not domestic, he said. It references Hale Holdings, Master Trust. That name doesn't show up in standard divorce forms by accident. Daniel waved it off. Yeah, I know them. They're just one of our investors. They're your largest investor, Mark corrected quietly. And if this trust language is coming into a family court file, it means someone is tying your marriage to your ownership structure. Daniel laughed, but it sounded thinner now. She's a stay-at-home parent, Mark. She doesn't own anything. Mark didn't smile. The clause doesn't name her, he said. It names the trust. I need to confirm who holds beneficial control and what rights they have. Fine, Daniel shrugged. Do your job. As he reached the door, Mark added quietly, until I confirm, don't move any assets. No large transfers. No sudden sales. If this escalates, everything becomes visible to the court, to regulators, and to your board. Daniel paused. You're overreacting. Maybe, Mark said. But freezing is cheaper than being accused of hiding money, Daniel scoffed. You worry too much. He left, already rehearsing his version of the story in his head. That night, Daniel poured himself a drink in the quiet house. The silence felt different now. Not empty. Exposed. His phone buzzed. Lila's name lit up the screen. Are you okay? He smiled and typed back. Of course, it's just paperwork, she replied quickly. Be careful. Paperwork is how people lose things. For the first time, a small thread of unease tugged at him. Across the city, Evelyn tucked Noah into bed. He looked up at her. Are we going back home soon? Evelyn brushed his hair gently. We're building a better one. She turned off the light and stood alone in the doorway for a moment. Her phone buzzed. A message from her attorney. Ownership verification from the trust will be ready for the hearing. Evelyn closed her eyes. Good, she whispered. She walked back to the small dining table where the sealed document still waited like a quiet promise. Outside, the world went on as usual. Inside court systems and boardrooms, quiet mechanisms were already turning. And Daniel Hale, still convinced he was untouchable, had no idea that the next paper placed in front of him would be the one he could no longer ignore. Lila Monroe knew something was wrong the moment she opened the copy of the court filing Daniel had left on his desk. He'd stormed out of his office to shout at someone in finance, leaving the papers half open. Lila's job had always included keeping his life organized. She told herself she was just checking what chaos she'd need to manage. Her hands trembled not from shock, but from recognition. She sat in her apartment later that night, laptop glowing in the dark, rereading the legal language she'd quietly scanned and then downloaded from the court's online system. This wasn't a dramatic threat. This wasn't emotional posturing. This was careful, surgical, written by someone who knew exactly where to strike. Words like full financial disclosure, temporary restraint on asset transfers, and trust-linked interests involving Hale Holdings. Master Trust stared back at her. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a fuse. Lila leaned back slowly, confidence draining with every line. She thought of Evelyn Hale, not angry, not loud, not desperate, just calm, always calm. That calm suddenly felt dangerous. Lila had entered Daniel's life believing she understood power. She was 29, ambitious, and smart enough to know when a man was rising and when to attach herself to that rise. Daniel had been easy, too easy. Flattered by attention, hungry for admiration, grateful for someone who made his life simpler. When Evelyn disappeared from the house, Lila thought she had won. Now, staring at the filings, Lila realized she had misjudged the woman she replaced. Evelyn wasn't weak, she was quiet. And quiet people didn't fight without preparation. The next morning, Lila arrived at the office early, too early. She watched executives walk past her desk with tight expressions. Whispers traveled faster than emails now. People sensed instability before it was announced. Daniel wasn't in yet. Lila logged into her computer and began copying files. Not randomly, carefully. Emails between her and Daniel. Voice notes he'd sent late at night. Expense approvals with his signature, but her account listed. Messages where he told her to just reclassify it or put that through under client development. No one checks that line. She saved everything to an encrypted flash drive. Then she opened a secure browser and searched for a name she had heard in the halls recently. The external investigator hired for the board review. She had overheard Daniel complain about some guy digging around because the investors are nervous. That was enough. The meeting took place in a neutral location. No logos, no windows, no names beyond first ones. The investigator studied Lila across the table. He saw fear but also calculation. "You're not here to apologize," he said. Lila swallowed. "No. Then why are you here?" She slid the flash drive across the table. "I know how this ends," she said quietly. "I just don't want to be crushed with him." The investigator didn't touch the drive yet. "What's on it?" "Emails," she said. "Approvals, messages, proof that he directed transactions and used company money for personal things. Most of it has his name on it, not mine." "And what do you want in return?" he asked. Lila met his eyes. "I want it on record that I cooperated," she said. "If this goes to regulators, if there are charges, I want them to see that I didn't hide anything. I won't lie to protect him." The investigator leaned back. "That's not immunity," he said. "I know," Lila replied. "But it's better than pretending I didn't know anything until it's too late." He studied her for a moment, then picked up the drive. Later that evening, Evelyn received the call. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "Lila Monroe wants to cooperate," the investigator said. She provided extensive evidence. "She confirms your husband directed the transfers and created her inflated role." Evelyn paused. "Why?" she asked. "Self-preservation," he replied. "Not remorse." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Tell her this," Evelyn said. "Tell the truth, fully. The law will decide the rest. No threats, no bargaining, just reality." The investigator hesitated. "You understand she helped him hurt you." Evelyn's voice remained steady. "And now she's helping the truth hurt him. That's enough for me." The next morning, Lila submitted her resignation. No farewell email, no explanation, no transition period. By noon, her corporate access was revoked. Her badge stopped working. Her name vanished from internal directories. She packed her desk quickly, aware of eyes watching from behind glass walls. Some curious, some relieved, some calculating their own distance from Daniel. She didn't look back. Daniel found out last. He arrived at the office furious, already irritated by unanswered calls. He stormed through the lobby, expecting Lila to appear with explanations and a coffee in hand. She didn't. Her desk was empty, clean, as if she had never been there. Daniel grabbed the nearest assistant. "Where's Lila?" The assistant hesitated. "She resigned. Effective immediately." Daniel's face hardened. "That's impossible." "She turned in her badge this morning," the assistant added. IT removed her access. HR said she left her resignation letter on their desk. Daniel stood still. For the first time since the divorce filing, something cold slid down his spine. He pulled out his phone and called Lila, straight to voicemail. He called again. Nothing. Across the city, Evelyn sat quietly at the dining table, Noah coloring beside her. Her phone buzzed. A message from the investigator. "She gave us everything." Evelyn closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not in relief, in acceptance. She looked at her son, smiling softly at his drawing, unaware of how close the storm now was. Evelyn reached for her tea, hands steady. Somewhere, Daniel Hale was beginning to realize that the people he relied on most were gone. And very soon, the truth he had ignored would be placed in front of him, not as accusation, but as fact. The room went quiet before anyone was told to be quiet. Not the nervous kind, not the respectful kind, the heavy kind. Daniel Hale sat at one table with his attorney, Mark. His shoulders were squared, hands folded, confidence carefully reconstructed after weeks of strain. His suit was tailored, his expression controlled. Across the aisle, Evelyn Hale sat beside her attorney. She did not look at Daniel. She did not need to. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. Paper rustled. Silence returned. This was the first formal financial hearing in their divorce case. On the docket, it looked routine. To everyone actually in the room, it was anything but. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the file. "This court will now address financial disclosures relevant to the dissolution petition and related corporate interests," she said calmly. Daniel leaned back slightly. Routine, he told himself. He had faced worse in investor updates. The judge nodded to the clerk. "Clerk, please distribute the sealed ownership disclosures for review." The clerk stood and began placing documents on both tables. Daniel accepted his copy without looking up. He recognized the line at the top. UN sealed for court review, only another form. Another distraction. He flipped the first page, then the second. Still casual, still relaxed, until his fingers froze. His eyes locked onto a line he had never seen before. Then another, then a name. Evelyn Hale printed clearly, not as spouse, not as beneficiary, not as witness, but as majority beneficial owner controlling interest holder via Hale Holdings, Master Trust, authorized voting authority over Nexus Point Technologies, Incorporated. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The room didn't move. It didn't need to. He flipped the page again, faster now, scanning as if the words might change if he read them differently. They didn't. The corporate records attached from Hale Holdings board liaison confirmed it. The trust that had funded his company, his silent whale, was not just a big investor. It was hers. His hands began to shake. Across the aisle, Evelyn finally lifted her eyes. This was the first time she had looked at him since the night he pushed her and their child out of the house. Her face held no anger, no satisfaction, just certainty. Daniel looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Not the quiet woman who folded laundry. Not the patient wife who listened. Not the mother he had dismissed, but the person he had never bothered to ask about. The person who owned everything he thought was his. Mark leaned in close, his voice barely audible. "Daniel, we need to request a recess." Daniel didn't respond. The judge watched him carefully. "Mr. Hale," she said evenly, "do you require clarification on the document?" Daniel swallowed. I don't understand," he managed. The judge nodded once. "That," she said, "is not the same as the document being unclear." She turned to the clerk. "Please confirm the basis for this disclosure." "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk replied. The ownership records are certified by the trustees of Hale Holdings, Master Trust, and corroborated by Nexus Point's board minutes. The trust holds a controlling stake, and the beneficial owner named is Mrs. Evelyn Hale. Daniel's heart pounded. Trust, control, his company, all tied to the woman he had pushed out of his home. Evelyn's attorney rose. Your Honor, he said calmly, the petitioner chose not to disclose her financial position during the marriage, which she is legally permitted to do under these trust structures. However, given the allegations of financial misconduct and misuse of corporate funds by Mr. Hale, her ownership is now directly relevant. Daniel's attorney stood quickly. This is highly irregular. My client was never informed. The judge raised a hand. Not being informed, she said, is not the same as the structure being illegal. She looked back at Daniel. Mr. Hale, she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Were you aware that your company's majority investor was a trust controlled by your spouse? The question hung in the air. Every eye turned toward him. Daniel opened his mouth. No words came out. He closed it again. Nothing. For the first time in his life, confidence failed him completely. Silence answered for him. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Not in relief, in release. Years of restraint, years of choosing love over leverage. All of it had led here not to revenge, but to truth. The judge made a note. Let the record reflect, she said, that Mr. Hale was not aware of his spouse's controlling ownership interest. She paused. And let the record further reflect that this does not alter the validity of that ownership. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. He couldn't. Because the ground beneath him, the company, the identity, the power had already cracked. And as the judge turned to the next issue on the docket, financial restraints and referrals, the man who thought he owned everything finally understood. He had never even read the fine print. The gavel didn't need to be loud to destroy him. It came down once, sharp, final. Daniel Hale felt the sound more than he heard it. It traveled through the table, through the chair, straight into his chest. For a brief moment, the room spun not because the judge was speaking too fast, but because his world was falling apart faster than his mind could keep up. The judge's voice was calm, almost gentle, as she delivered the sequence that would undo him. Based on the evidence presented, this court grants the petition for dissolution of marriage. Daniel's hands clenched. Primary physical custody of the minor child is awarded to the petitioner, Mrs. Evelyn Hale. Mr. Hale is granted scheduled visitation, as outlined in the parenting plan. His throat tightened. The court further issues a protective order over all marital assets and Mr. Braun, Hale's personal holdings in Nexus Point Technologies. No sale, transfer, or encumbrance may occur without court approval. Mark Ellison, his attorney, lowered his eyes. Finally, the judge continued. Given the documented misuse of corporate funds and the corroborating testimony provided through the board-authorized audit, this court is referring the financial evidence to the appropriate regulatory and prosecutorial authorities for review. Silence followed, not shock, not outrage. Just the quiet recognition that nothing in that room could undo what had been said. Across the aisle, Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Not in victory, in completion. She felt Noah's future settle into place, stable, protected, shielded from the damage his father had created. When she opened her eyes, the judge was already moving on, paperwork being signed, records updated. The process continued without ceremony because justice didn't need drama to be devastating. The board meeting happened that same afternoon. No speeches, no inspirational slides, just an agenda item. The Hale Holdings representative joined via secure video. With the majority stake now openly tied to Evelyn, no one in the room misunderstood whose wishes were being expressed when the representative spoke. A motion was read. To suspend Daniel Hale as CEO of Nexus Point Technologies, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the financial investigation, and to remove him from all operational authority. No debate, no defenses, hands raised, unanimous. By the time Daniel returned to the building, his access card still opened the lobby turnstiles but failed at the executive floor. Security met him there. Mr. Hale, one of them said, not unkindly, we've been instructed to escort you to HR. He was given a formal letter outlining his suspension and board decision. His laptop was taken, his corporate email access cut, his office door badge deactivated. Colleagues avoided his eyes, some out of fear, some out of relief. some out of shame for not being surprised. By evening, the story had leaked. Headlines spread quickly through industry news and social media. Founder suspended amid financial probe, majority owner revealed as estranged spouse, board moves to stabilize Nexus Point after internal audit. The man who claimed to have built everything now had nothing solid to stand on. Daniel wandered through the city like a ghost. Every place he once felt respected now felt hostile. His phone buzzed endlessly, messages from reporters, calls from people pretending to care, silence from those who once promised loyalty. Lila never called. Mark sent a single text. Given today's developments and the criminal referral, I can no longer represent you. I recommend independent counsel, experience in white-collar defense. Daniel stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Outside the courthouse, earlier that day, Evelyn had stepped into the late afternoon light. The air had felt different, lighter. Like something heavy had finally been lifted from above her, not from her. Daniel had seen her and rushed forward, his composure finally cracked. Evelyn, wait. She had stopped. He had stood there, suit wrinkled, eyes red, pride stripped bare. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, voice breaking. Why didn't you ever say who you were? For a moment, the past had hovered between them. Years of dinners, conversations, choices. Evelyn looked at him not with anger, not with satisfaction, with clarity. You never asked who I was, she said quietly. You only cared who you thought you were. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't mean. She raised a hand gently. It doesn't matter what you meant, she said. It matters what you did. She turned and walked away. Daniel stood frozen as she disappeared into the crowd. That night, Evelyn returned to the small rental home. Noah ran to her, smiling wide. Did we win? Evelyn knelt and hugged him tightly. We're safe, she said. That's what matters. As Noah laughed and pulled her toward the kitchen to show her a drawing he'd made, Evelyn glanced back once at the door. At the quiet space where fear used to live, it was gone. But something else was coming. Something final. And as she closed the door behind her, the world prepared to witness the last step of Daniel Hale's undoing. Not in court, not on headlines, but in the quiet place where power finally sat where it belonged. The room waited for Evelyn Hale to speak. It wasn't the tense waiting of fear or uncertainty. It was the kind that followed authority, quiet, respectful, deliberate. A long table stretched across the boardroom, polished to a mirror shine. Men and women in tailored suits sat on both sides, documents aligned, pens ready. The Nexus Point logo glowed on the wall, smaller now beneath a new line of text noting its parent entity. At the head of the table sat Evelyn. Same straight posture, same calm presence. But everything else had changed. No hiding, no silence for protection. She presided today not as a temporary figurehead, but as the majority owner whose control had finally stepped out of the shadows. The board liaison from Hale Holdings sat to her right, more an advisor than a handler now. Beside her, in a chair slightly too big for him, sat Noah, now 7, his feet swinging gently as he drew in a small notebook. He hummed to himself, safe, unaware of the weight in the room. A senior executive leaned toward another and whispered, barely audible, "They respect her." Evelyn heard it anyway. She didn't smile. She didn't correct the tone. She simply replied, just as quietly, "They always respected the company. Now they know who protects it." The executive nodded, understanding settling in his eyes. The meeting moved forward. Reports were presented. Decisions were made. The company that once carried Daniel Hale's ego now carried something different. Structure, oversight, boundaries. The financial controls tightened after the scandal. An independent audit committee answered directly to the board, not to a single charismatic founder. Travel and expense policies were rewritten. Personal use of funds was explicitly banned, not informally overlooked. Evelyn listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was precise, clear, final. No one interrupted her. No one needed to. She wasn't there to play CEO. The new, qualified CEO, someone who had built companies without stealing from them, handled day-to-day operations. Evelyn handled direction, stability instead of spectacle. At the end of the table, the board liaison slid a single document forward. "This is the last item," he said. The paper wasn't dramatic. No bold warnings. No threatening language, just resolution. It formalized the final pieces. Daniel Hale's permanent removal from all positions, his shares converted and placed into a monitored structure under the court's orders. The company's commitment to cooperate fully with regulators, and a governance charter that ensured no one person could quietly reroute funds again. Evelyn looked at the document for a long moment. She remembered the night she had knelt beside a locked drawer, promising herself she would never need what was inside. She remembered Noah asking if they had done something wrong. She remembered Daniel's voice saying, "This is my house." She picked up the pen. No anger, no triumph. Just clarity. She signed. The sound of the pen scratching paper echoed softly. When she finished, she set it down. "That concludes today's agenda," she said. The board stood. Some offered their hands. Some simply nodded. Evelyn didn't wait for applause. Outside, the afternoon sun rested gently on the building's glass facade. Evelyn walked out with Noah, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Are we done?" Noah asked. "Yes," she said. "We are." He smiled. "Can we get ice cream?" Evelyn laughed softly. "Yes, we can." They walked down the steps together, free, whole, unbroken. Behind them, the doors closed not as an ending, but as a boundary she no longer needed to fight to cross. Across town, Daniel Hale sat alone in a small apartment. No photos, no awards, no visitors. His phone lay face down on the table. It hadn't buzzed all day. He stared at the wall, replaying moments that now felt unreal, laughs that had vanished, confidence that had dissolved, a life he thought he owned. He finally understood something too late. Power had never shouted in his house. It had waited in drawers he never opened, in questions he never asked, in a woman he never really saw. That evening, Evelyn tucked Noah into bed in their new home, not the temporary rental. A simple, warm place she chose herself, purchased through a straightforward structure in her own name this time. No secrecy, no hidden titles. Just a house where every room felt like theirs. Noah looked up at her sleepily. "Mom? Yes? You're not sad anymore?" Evelyn paused, then smiled. "No," she said, "I'm not." She turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to his breathing steady. She walked into the living room and looked around. No trophies, no luxury for show, just peace. Evelyn sat down, closed her eyes, and let the quiet settle, not as silence, but as strength. Because some people never need to prove who they are. They only need the right moment to stop hiding it. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It only waits for the moment it's needed. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If it moved you, like, share, and comment on the lessons you learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'll see you in my next video.